leave a like and subscribe.
I'm out. Leave a message.
Hey, you thoughtless bastard! I've been ringing you since 9! Please, let me know you're okay. I'm worried, darling, worried sick. I've been ringing your mobile for hours, but it just rings and rings. Please call me. Me again. Please don't do this to me. I love you. Oh, Christ, Tony! Please! Please, Tony!
In my lifetime, I don't think ever anybody's ever going to get the truth of really that night, what it was about.
The Essex boys were a group of vicious, drug-dealing villains.
Violence, murder, sex, drugs.
Their deaths have been the subject of 2 Hollywood films and countless newspaper headlines.
I think it was on the news early in the morning. My wife said to me, "Oh, look who's been killed."
Their activities led to some innocent deaths at a very young age.
A young girl going out to celebrate her 18th birthday party with a group of friends, never to come home again.
They protected their patch with extreme violence and were known as unscrupulous double-crossers.
It was only a matter of time when 3 got killed. Just a matter of time.
They were seen as an accident waiting to happen.
I did say to him, the way you're going, you know what's going to happen. Someone's going to creep up behind you and go bump in the back of the head.
And the accident did. A brutal gangland execution.
They double-crossed, robbed and taken the piss out of so many people. People were lining up to do it.
Finding their killers and the subsequent trial, based on the evidence of a suspect Supergrass, raised as many questions as answers.
There was no openness here. The jury did not hear the true story.
In the 1990s, Essex had become a centre of the British drugs trade. Its East Coast ports offered easy access to and from Europe, and its proximity to London acted as a magnet for some of the most ruthless drugs barons in southern England.
A lot of criminals had moved out of London in the 1970s and into Essex, and people realised that there was a big market in clubs, in pubs, for selling drugs.
Selling drugs, however, turned out to be a deadly occupation for the notorious Essex boys. The gang included Tony Tucker, Pat Tate, Craig Rolfe, and suppliers Mick Steele, Jack Womes, and Darren Nichols. Tucker ran a security firm providing doormen to clubs in and around Essex, including the infamous Raquel's in Basildon.
In Raquel's, it was like everyone was on the drugs. Doorman was selling drugs. I'm not saying what doorman, but the doorman was selling drugs. And half the time it was Tony's gear they were selling.
Well, the business they were in pills, in ecstasy pills, that they would distribute to clubs.
Within the clubs, dealers controlled the sale of drugs, but the doormen controlled the dealers. Tony Tucker took a cut from every deal.
You've got to put your people in, and their job is to stop anyone else dealing in the club, and then split the profits. Or give them a percentage of the profits, a third, whatever.
Tucker was good at getting other people to do his bidding.
He was manipulative, and he fooled probably a lot of people into thinking that he was a good friend to them, whereas basically he was a user. That's all he was a user and a bully.
To help run his empire, Tucker had an enforcer, Craig Rolfe, whose life started badly and then went downhill. He was born in Holloway Prison, to a mother who was serving a long sentence in connection with the murder of Rolfe's father.
The impression I had of Rolfe was that He was a very obliging sort of guy, would do anything. He was a sort of golfer, you know, and he liked to be on the fringes of things. He wasn't really a villain.
Rolf was also an increasingly enthusiastic user, especially of steroids and cocaine.
Many people take cocaine and they enjoy taking it. It gives them a bit of energy, makes them feel lively and happy. Unfortunately, when aggressive people take cocaine, it makes aggressive people more aggressive.
Even more feared as an enforcer in the organisation was Pat Tate, a man who during one of his frequent stays in prison met Tucker on one of his rare stretches inside.
Pat Tate was a 20-stone steroid monster. He's actually a nice-looking guy, Pat was.
Tate and Tucker were both heavy users of steroids. Tate's behaviour was unpredictable at best, psychotic at worst.
Steroids tend to make people more irritable, more aggressive, more combative, and if you already have a personality that is volatile and aggressive and dominant, then it's likely to make that person more aggressive and dominant. Someone taking large amounts of steroids, large amounts of cocaine, that's going to result in all manner of difficulties.
Tate and Tucker definitely had difficulties over their business methods when buying and selling drugs. There was certainly no honour among these thieves.
Their speciality was robbing people. They would make a meet with some people who were selling, say, cocaine. They'd meet them at the motorway services and get them to meet one side of the service while they were the other side of the service. They'd cross over and say they were going to leave someone there while they went across and checked the commodity. Well, when they got to the other side, they'd just take off.
Pat Tate's fearsome bulk might be helpful when it came to robbing drug dealers of their wares, but his erratic behaviour was now turning him into a liability.
Pat Tate was basically a bodybuilder, got on steroids and basically a bully. He went in a pizza house, smacked the bloke around because he was a fool.
The pizza manager received this treatment just for speaking without respect to Tate on the telephone when he placed a pizza order for something not on the menu.
You just had to be careful what you said because it don't matter who you was, they would have a go.
Even old friendships couldn't save someone if they got on the wrong side of the Tucker-Tate combo, as Steve Nipper Ellis discovered when he made the mistake of discussing Tucker's whereabouts with one girlfriend to another.
Tony's walked in, and then I was hoovering, doing my cleaning up, doing my housework, and Tony said, so I stopped the hoover. Tony said to me, "Where's the thing?" Which he meant the 2-2 revolver. So I got the 2-2 revolver out from under the stairs where it was hidden, give it to him, said it's clean and it's loaded. I've checked it. With that, he's got the gun in his right hand. He's pushed me back against the wall and started banging the gun in my head. And I just thought I'm dead. And so I kept thinking I'm dead because I knew it was loaded.
Having made his escape from the gun-toting Tucker, Ellis later decided to exact revenge.
Last time I see Pat was just after I shot him and he was in the kitchen window when I tried to shoot him then and he ran down the hall. Last time I see Tony was after I tried to shoot him, and as I was driving out of town trying to find their car's come out of onto a T-junction, and I see them, they see me, but I'd driven past them and then they were staying behind me, and each time I was going to get out of the car and run back and shoot them, they were reversing on a main road, so that was the last time I see him.
Bleeding from his gunshot wound, a hospitalised Tate then tried to lure Ellis to his bedside, where he had hidden a gun.
Apparently he went down for an operation or something and the nurse was changing his bed and she found the gun under the bed, and Pat got nicked for having the gun and he ended up going back in prison on breach of his parole. There was me, like a lunatic, running around with a shotgun.
With violence becoming an increasingly common part of their armoury, Tony Tucker's firm was about to enter choppy waters. But for now, the importing of their drugs seemed to be plain sailing.
Obviously the drugs was coming across the channel in a rib, you know, a semi-rigid inflatable. And obviously Essex is an easy route across. So someone could make a serious lot of money by taking that across.
While in jail, Tate had met someone who could help the Essex boys make serious money. That someone was Michael Steele, a sailor with his own boat, who was already in the illegal drugs importation game.
Michael Steele was not a gang member. He was a professional drug dealer. A very intelligent man, a very, very well-qualified engineer, charming at times and ruthless at other times. He was an organiser and a leader.
Steele was also a pilot and often flew the drugs into improvised landing strips and former World War II air bases across Essex, Norfolk and Kent.
Mick Steele wasn't fancy cars or Porsches or Jaguars or anything like that. He had his own truck where he'd done his own engineering work. You know, he wasn't, you know, the big drug baron. That wasn't Mickey Steele.
Steele was the architect of the smuggling operations and worked with Jack Womes, who looked after storage and distribution of the drugs once in Essex.
Jack Womes, a large-built man, he was a steadfast rock for Steele. He was his lieutenant who did as he was told and supported Michael Steele in dishonest activities.
Him and Jack got on well because they was both engineers. They always talking engines and, you know, which didn't interest me.
The final member of the Essex boys was Darren Nichols. He too had met Steele, Womes and Tate at Hollesley Bay Jail.
Darren Nichols, a married man with children, as far as my memory serves me, a couple of daughters, held a regular job down, then got involved in some dishonest behaviour, and as a result of that met up with Michael Steele.
Steele and Womes brought in and distributed some of the drugs sold in the Essex clubs, where the doors were controlled by Tucker and his bouncers. In the second half of 1995, Tucker increasingly supplemented his sales of cannabis with the clubbers' favourite, ecstasy. To keep up with demand, he found himself a new supplier who sold him ecstasy pills known as apples. These are extra potent and could pose a very real danger for the less sophisticated Essex clubber.
Apple ecstasy has a reputation of being a particularly strong form of ecstasy. But one of the problems with buying an ecstasy pill is that there are so many different ones around and they change almost every week and you don't really know what's in them. And there are variations in the strength that they contain, so there's no great quality control.
Meanwhile, Tucker's doormen ensured only their dealers were allowed to supply drugs in the clubs where they supplied the doormen.
If anyone else went into a nightclub and started selling their own particular drugs, the doorman would stop them. They'd take their drugs off of them, give them a clump and chuck them out.
In 1995, it seemed that the only way in Essex to conduct nefarious business was to pay one's dues to the so-called Essex boys. But was their reign of terror about to be challenged? And where would it lead?
One time I made a meeting with Tate because Tucker wouldn't come to the meeting, so he sent Tate. That's when I did say to him, the way you're going, you know what's going to happen. Someone's going to creep up behind you and go bump in the back of the head. I was going to do that to Tucker, and when you're with him, same's going to happen to you. And that's when he looked me in the eye and said, well, if it happens, it happens. 3 days later it happened.
Tony Tucker, Pat Tate and Craig Rolfe had started working together in the early 90s and were joined by Michael Steele, Jack Womes and Darren Nichols to form the Essex Boys. However, the scamming of small-time dealers by Tucker and Tate was souring relationships with the wider criminal fraternity.
They'd obviously upset a lot of people. They'd done a lot of drug deals. And they, not only when they'd done drug deals, they'd actually gone to the drug deals, taken drugs, taken the money what they've gone there to buy the drugs with, and left.
However, Tucker didn't always check the provenance of the dealers he had robbed and beaten. Some were well connected with rival outfits based in London's East End and Tilbury Docks. so there was a history of bad blood. But for now, the Essex boys were supplying their ever younger customers with an ever wider range of drugs.
Looking to get something. What's you looking? Pills? Pills? How many do you want? 8. I'll do you 8 with the balls in. But they're happy. Yeah. You got the money? Yeah.
A lot of ecstasy is produced in Holland, where they have quite high standards of drug production. And they mix up a big vat of it, and then they divide it into approximate doses and make tablets out of it. And the normal dose is about 100 to 150 milligrams of MDMA per tablet. But if you want to sell more drugs and you cut it with various impurities and you use whatever's available, and people aren't that fussy, and if you're involved in criminal activities, why shouldn't they adulterate the drug? So you're never quite sure what you get, and a large amount of street ecstasy tablets aren't that pure.
Got plenty of booze in? You know what my dad's like about alcohol in the house?
But most teenagers are not too particular about the provenance of their lifestyle drugs. Certainly when Essex policeman's daughter Leah Betts planned her 18th birthday party, she didn't ask too many questions. A few weeks previously, in early October, one heck of a different present was delivered by a hopelessly lost and disorientated pilot who had panicked and dumped his illegal load in an Essex field from on high. A local farmer awoke to find nearly £500 of cannabis, worth about £500,000 in his pond.
Police?
The Leah Betts investigation was a very large-style police inquiry. So you would be treading on people's toes and causing them as much, and from my point, as much disruption and mayhem as you possibly can.
I would have thought Tucker, Tate and Rolf would have then been thinking they're ready to get a spin and get pulled in, because they were interviewing everybody in the club, everybody who uses the club. They was interviewing so many people. They must have been quite worried at the time.
Although they couldn't prove, they knew where it was coming from, and they knew that it had come from Tucker.
November 1995 was a busy time for the Essex boys, and almost everything they touched seemed to unravel at once. Michael Steele had set up another large cannabis deal in Amsterdam. Over half the money to finance this drugs purchase came from a consortium of scary backers who were contacts of Tate.
They'd sometimes go across to Amsterdam or Rotterdam, pick up the whole lot and come back and moor up as if nothing had happened over the weekend, which was very risky.
Although risky, there was generally plenty of coastline to avoid patrols.
The sea's big, and the chances of getting caught, you can be so many miles away. They could be 40 mile, 60 mile, 80 mile down the coast.
But this time, it wasn't plain sailing. The Essex police were called to investigate reports of a suspicious boat landing. Fortunately, the drugs had already been offloaded. But the gang's close shave put increasing pressure on smugglers Steele and Worms. Not only had the police nearly caught the gang as they imported the drug shipment from Amsterdam, but it turned out that this cannabis was not up to scratch. After numerous phone calls from dissatisfied customers, Worms and Nichols confronted their Dutch suppliers, who admitted that 2/3 of the shipment was substandard, and agreed to return 2/3 of the money. But Tucker and Tate's backers were demanding all their money back. A paranoid Tate blamed Steele for buying the substandard cannabis, putting inter-gang relationships under severe strain. To make matters worse, Within 24 hours of Steele's return from Amsterdam with the partial refund, party girl Leah Betts, who had never regained consciousness, died. Her death made the front pages.
The Leah Betts story had a whole series of elements to it. She was an attractive-looking teenager. People always idolise people who died. That's just a completely natural human reaction. And if you add into that mix the fact she was a policeman's daughter, from a Red Top Papers point of view, she was the ideal victim around which to build an exciting story. It's not surprising it ran for days and days.
A young girl going out to celebrate her 18th birthday party with a group of friends, never to come home again. How sad can that be? At the hands of somebody else peddling some pills.
After the death of Leah Betts from ecstasy that the Essex boys had supplied, they should have been keeping a low profile.
Those who deal with drugs are dealing with death, and the place for them to be is off the streets behind a metal door.
However, greed and debts from their failed drugs foray to Amsterdam drove them into keeping the planned rendezvous with the East End drug dealers. Tucker, using his usual business techniques, planned to double-cross the EastEnders, leaving with their money and their drugs, unaware that he was about to become a victim of an even deadlier double-cross.
Go on, do them!
Their greed had cost them their lives.
They were taken completely by surprise. I think that was certainly the impression given, and it was a cold-blooded professional hit.
Could have been undertaken by one person, but highly unlikely. In all probability, two, and those two have still got to leave the scene, so that includes another person. They've got to leave the scene very quickly. They've got firearms in their possession. You're not going to walk down the road with guns on show or tucked under your coat or your jacket. Transport away is essential.
Once you have more than one person involved in a murder, you've got two possible informers.
Some months pass while the police investigate this triple gangland killing. Undercover policemen suspect local villain Darren Nichols of being involved. Perhaps he was the hitman's getaway driver.
The police ain't got big radar on their head and going, he's a gangster, he's a villain, he's this, he's an armed robber, he's this and that. They can only get it by people telling them.
The police needed a supergrass to crack the case. A sting was put in place. Nichols was persuaded to transport a cannabis shipment in his car. He was then caught red-handed.
Excuse me, sir, can I see the boot of your car, please?
Right, happy now? No, let's have a look in.
Could Nichols be persuaded to become the supergrass in return for a shorter sentence on the drugs charge?
Darren Nichols got nicked for the importation. He's basically couldn't handle going back to prison, doing the bird, whatever you want to call it.
Informants become informants for several reasons, including altruism, money and self-preservation. And it seems that Nichols became an informant for the last two reasons.
Supergrass Darren Nichols, who had a history of acting as a paid police informer, identified his old partners in crime, Michael Steele and Jack Womes, as the two murderers. Nichols admitted to being their driver on the night.
Darren Nichols gave information out of fear and self-preservation, his own life. He knew what those people were capable of, Steele and Womes. He knew. He drove them away from the scene. He knew what they were capable of.
Based almost solely on the evidence of the supergrass Nichols, this is what the prosecution alleged led to the gangland killing of the Essex boys. Tucker had put unbearable pressure on Steele and Womes to return all the money from the previous drugs run from Amsterdam, where the cannabis had turned out to be substandard. Resenting this pressure, the prosecution claimed Steele turned on the three men who blamed him for the failure, and also suggested that Steele had his own mole planted in the East End organisation with whom the Essex boys were about to do business.
Hello? Yes, Tony.
He asked this contact to ring Tucker and set them up for a fateful recce of the drop site.
Fuck! What? Fuck! What? Ah, get out of your face! You fucking wind me up! Who the fuck was that? That was Sammy. The deal's on. We're all sweet as! Sweet!
Steele tells Tucker that he has personally heard from his own contacts within the gang, and now knows exactly where the aircraft will land. He offers to meet him and his henchmen Tate and Rolfe later that evening, to guide them to the spot near Rettendon and arrange a rehearsal for the landing the next night. A Range Rover containing Tucker, Tate and Rolfe arrives in the pub car park just outside Rettendon. Nichols and Womes go on ahead to unlock the gate in the field, and Mick Steele joins the others to show them the way. The scene is now set for one of the nastiest, most brutal killings of the 20th century.
The prosecution case essentially was that these men had been lured into this trap, were completely unaware that they were the targets rather than the drugs that they thought that they were going to get hold of.
The field in which the plane will be landing the following day is just at the end of the lane.
Kray was driving, Tony was next to him in the passenger seat, Pat was in the back with somebody. They drove down the Rettendon Turnpike. They was looking for what Tony, Pat and Craig believed was another easy job, to mug some dealers, take a load of stuff.
The entrance is being barred by a securely locked gate.
Pat's seen the pump action, gone like that. Bang, Craig, bang. Tony, Craig. Tony and Craig didn't know a thing. You think of a loud bang in that confined space, you're going to you wouldn't even know, they didn't even know what happened. They were dead before they even heard the second sound of the gun.
The people were waiting where they thought they were going to have the switch over. Instead of getting a commodity, they got killed. Because obviously the people whose toes they were treading on were heavy people.
Yeah, it was only a matter of time when three got killed. Just a matter of time, because I was catching everybody, having everybody over, just chucking away about in general where they could.
Well, what's got them killed was obviously greed. They'd been doing this, they'd been tucking people up, and that was the carrot that was put on the front of the donkey's nose. It was a big one, and they threw caution to the wind and just went for it, which the people obviously knew that they would.
They might indeed have been tempted by the carrot of £1 million drop. Shared with their old enemies and supposedly current cronies, the East London gang, and then paid for their greed with their lives. But what really happened that fateful December night in 1995? By the mid-1990s, the fame of the Essex boys had spread. In autumn 1995, an East London gang had seen their potential profits from a cannabis drop disappear into an Essex pond. The Essex boys had offered to safeguard the next shipment with a view of double-crossing the London gang, only to fall victim to a double cross themselves, much closer to home.
One of the most striking things about the evidence of the bodies was that one of them had his mobile phone in his hand, one of them was in the driving seat, and the implication was that it had been an extremely professional hit. They hadn't even had time to get out of the car and make a run for it.
Tate Tucker Rolfe was shot with the most precision you could ever see. You know, it wasn't... It was a marksman that shot those three guys.
The bloody execution of 3 of the Essex Boys gang led to a massive police investigation. This threw a spotlight on the Essex underworld and on the police to make arrests.
If 3 people get executed in what is obviously a gang killing, and it's in the context of a drug scene out there in Essex, which was widely known about to be pretty bad and pretty out of control, you can take it as read that very, very senior people in the Home Office and the police forces, quite possibly outside Essex, will make phone calls and say, I don't know what's going on down there, but will somebody please sort this out?
I think the police knew right from the start that they'd been killed by people who knew them well, so they were already looking at a limited number of people in that particular underworld.
Essex police had encouraged Darren Nichols to become a supergrass, and he, in turn, had identified Michael Steele and Jack Womes as the 2 murderers. But without any corroborating evidence, it took nearly 2 years to bring the case to trial. There were no forensics, no footprints, no DNA, nothing to connect Steele and Womes directly to the murders. The barrister who subsequently acted for Michael Steele in his attempts to get the case appealed finds this strange.
The allegation was that the killers of the 3 men in the vehicle had crossed a field which was covered in snow, that around the car there would have been footprints, that there were sweetie papers in the back of a car in which it was claimed that my client had travelled, and yet there was no DNA found.
On the floor there was a crisp packet and a topic wrapper. Now, if there was no DNA at the scene, how did someone eat all them crisps? So there was DNA there.
There was not a scintilla of DNA evidence. All of it is absurd. I mean, it really is strange that there was no science. No science.
But was it that odd?
When the police arrived at the scene where the Range Rover was with the 3 bodies inside, it had been snowing, but a thaw had set in. So had there been any evidence within the snow, it could have evaporated away, as it were. Who is to say that the 2 witnesses who found the bodies, when they arrived, and they clearly had to go to the Range Rover, they looked around, so their footprints could in fact have damaged possibly some evidence that may have been there.
But some things were undisputedly a bit odd that fateful night.
Tate Tucker and Rolfe went down that lane unarmed. They was villains known to have weapons around them. But why would they go down that lane if they was going to a drug deal or a temporary drug deal or even to a double cross, what they say? Why did they not go with guns? There was no guns at the scene.
Failing any forensics, the key evidence was the word of Darren Nichols.
Nichols, who claims to have been the driver for Womes and Steele on the night of the events, was later caught transporting a large amount of cannabis in the boot of his car. It seems that the police took a lenient view of this and offered other perks.
Without any forensic evidence, Nichols' evidence was crucial for the prosecution.
This was a case which was quite unusual in that the absolute core of the evidence against the men in the dog was the evidence of an informer, the evidence of somebody who had himself been a criminal, who was himself somebody who had been involved in serious crime. He basically did a deal that he would give evidence against others in order to save his own skin.
Obviously he didn't do it for nothing. He was the sort of man probably that would do anything rather than go in prison.
He knew that he was also in the frame, quite possibly, as somebody who was party to murder, multiple murders. That was the great threat that hung over him.
Since the 1970s, the police had successfully used grasses to spill the beans in return for perks. By the 90s, the police were no longer allowed to elicit information with large payments.
The concern was that if those sorts of inducements are available, might they in some way encourage people to lie, to develop a story in a way that's not truthful, and that justice itself is put in jeopardy because of the incentives available to somebody who is essentially a criminal and therefore untrustworthy by his very nature.
As they listened to Darren's evidence, some reporters suspected him of embroidering the facts.
Darren Nichols claimed that one of the alleged murderers had said that as they left the scene of the murders, that he felt like the angel of death. And I suppose it always seems odd that somebody comes up with such a helpful soundbite as they depart from the scene of a crime. And I think that certainly struck me and struck other reporters at the time.
Apart from Nichols' colourful testimony, the only other significant evidence came from mobile phone records. This was an area which was hotly contested over 4 days by legal experts on both sides. On the 6th of December, several calls were made between Nichols to the defendants. The prosecution argued that Jack Womes was briefing him as the getaway driver, but John Womes has an alternative explanation.
My brother Jack, of the morning of the murders, Darren Nichols, the Supergrass, rang Jack up and said, my car's broken down on the way to work. And he said, would you pick it up, Jack? And Jack said, no, Darren, I'm working on the docks. And which he was. He said, I'll pick it up later.
Darren, where are you, buddy?
Just before 7 p.m. on the evening of the murders, the records show 2 4-second calls were made by Womes to Nichols. The prosecution alleged that they were made by Womes to summon the getaway vehicle after the murder. But were they?
After Jack had finished work, he goes and gets Darren's car and rings Darren up and says, Darren, I've got your car. I'll take it back to the workshop. And Darren said, fine. And that's what Jack done, brought the car back to the workshop. That's where they say that Jack rang Darren to say, I've just shot him, come and get me.
Neither side could conclusively prove what was said, but it gave the prosecution a corroborating factor in placing the men in conversation at the time.
It was essential evidence because it corroborated a lot of the evidence that Darren Nichols would give and was proved to be correct, and it also had him, Nichols, in touch with Steele and Womes prior to and at the time of the murders being committed.
There were other little bits of evidence to do with phone calls, mobile phones and so on, but essentially it was, believe the Supergrass, believe the defendants, make your choice, and the jury made their choice.
After a trial lasting almost 5 months and a lengthy deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict, and the judge sent Steele and Womes down for 3 life sentences. But not everyone thinks that the jury got it right.
They must have upset someone and grasses fitting them up for the job. And it wasn't them. I would bet my whole life on it.
In 2004, Helena Kennedy QC argued that the case should be reviewed on the basis of new evidence.
Darren Nichols, with the assistance of the police, it had to be, decided to do a deal for a book, for a documentary and for a film, and he had to get that in the bag before even the committal proceedings in the case. What the jury did not know was that he'd been offered a deal for a book. They had no knowledge of that.
No, let's have a look in there.
This media deal would have given Nichols the money to start a new comfortable life with a new identity, and would have replaced the financial rewards that the police were no longer allowed to offer criminals in return for grassing.
Did he elaborate this story to make it good for a movie? To make it good for a book on crime? To make it a bestseller? Did he tell a story that was fundamentally flawed? Now, we don't know, but the jury should have been told what had gone on.
This information was not given to the jury.
If we had known absolutely everything about what Darren Nichols had been doing at the time he was giving evidence in this trial, could the trial have gone the other way? And they called quite a lot of witnesses to look at this. They looked at the people who'd been writing the books and arranged the books, and they looked again at the policemen, and they looked where they went back over all this ground. And then in the end, the appeal court said, actually the trial would have come out with the same result.
With the right to appeal having been rejected, and now having spent 14 years in jail, their refusal to admit their crime means that the pair are ineligible for parole.
They've always pleaded, not me, not me, not me. Well, most people would break, wouldn't they? But if you didn't do it, you wouldn't break.
My father, in April, died. Just before he died, the week before he died, he visited my brother. And he said to my brother Jack, just a minute, Jack, so you can go home and look after your mother. I'm dying. My brother Jack said, no, I can't do that. I'm not admitting to something I've never done.
We may never know for certain whether Steele and Wombs committed these gruesome murders. But only Darren Nichols, the supergrass, actually managed to walk away from the carnage of the Essex Boys gang and hide in the shadows for the rest of his life.
I'm sorry. You've reached the limit on the number of calls that this person may receive. No more messages may be left for this person.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.
Leave a like and subscribe.